One of the features that GameMaker contains is the ability to work with surfaces. And I've long thought that surfaces are a really interesting feature of the game engine, because the idea is very simple and yet they allow you to do some very complicated things. And we'll be getting to those complicated things later because I like to talk about 3D and other graphics things. If you were to take a wild guess that surfaces are going to get tangled up in there in the future, you'd be correct. If you want just one example of what that can be, messing with render targets is one of the several steps involved in creating a toon shader effect, as well as some other very advanced things you can do with multiple render targets in 3D and in 2D. But let's start with something fun. So a long time ago, I made a video on surfaces. This was back in like 2015, I think. And I used an example where you get to basically paint on the screen. So like you get to make a little doodle MS Paint style. And that's a pretty silly thing to do, but it's also a very good way to quickly demonstrate what you can do with surfaces. So to start with, I'm going to increase the font size. I should probably find a way at some point to just make the default font size in GameMaker bigger, but it's not that much work to just hit F8 a few times. So what a surface is in a nutshell is a secondary render target. You can have the game draw stuff onto the surface instead of onto the screen, and the contents of the surface will persist between frames. So stuff that you were to draw onto the surface in one frame would still be there the next frame, as opposed to the when you draw onto the screen, which is cleared between frames. Inside the computer, the screen itself is actually its own surface. It's called the application surface. You may have heard this referred to as the frame buffer, or by other similar names. And the application surface is just a special surface that's managed by the game and erased every time a new frame is drawn.
Hey.
If you've ever seen what I like to call the Windows 95 effect, that is generally the consequence of the frame buffer, the application surface, whatever, not being cleared between frames. Anyway, let's create a surface. So let's draw onto the screen. Drawing onto the screen is one of the sillier uses for surfaces, but it's also probably the best way to demonstrate what happens that I can think of. So let's go with that. So let's clear the screen to white. This is mainly because it's easier to see what I'm going to be trying to do. You could draw clear and set the color to white, or you could just set the background color of the room to white or whatever other color you want. I'm going to use draw clear so that I don't have to go back over to the room editor if I want to change the color in the future. And let's draw a circle at the mouse cursor's position. So we can say mouse X, mouse Y. Alternatively, you could also say window mouse get X, window mouse get Y. The former have to do with the mouse's position in the room. The latter have to do with the mouse's position relative to the window, which is generally what you want. We could give it a radius. I'll give that a radius of 8, and we can say, do you want to draw the circle with just an outline or as a filled circle? And I want a filled circle, so let's set that argument to false. Also, I'm going to be drawing a blue circle. So let's just set the color to blue. And you can see that there is a circle being drawn at the mouse position. This is fairly elementary. Most people who've ever tried to draw things in GameMaker are aware of this function. And the position of the circle on the screen is not being preserved between frames. So when I move the mouse, the circle in the old position is no longer there. And like I said, that is because the application surface, the frame buffer, is being cleared between frames. If you do want to turn that off, by the way, if you allow me to go back to the room editor, you can find the background layer and either hide it, you can delete it. If you're using views, if you go down to room settings, there is clear display buffer. You can turn that off if you want, and that will prevent the screen from being erased between frames. And if I were to comment out the draw clear C white, that will now you can see the old circles are still there when I move the mouse, but that is not the purpose of this video. For the purpose of this video, I will assume that you would like the frame buffer to be cleared between frames. So let's close that. I'm just kind of obligated to mention something such as that. Where was I? Surfaces. So if you want to draw this onto a secondary surface that is not the application surface, you can go into something such as the create event and say surface create. Let's assign that to a variable. I'm going to call it, okay, I guess that's a reserved function name, so I can't call it that. I'm going to be calling it painting surface. Let's go with that. That's not a reserved word. We can give it a width of a width of the size of the window. You could give this a width and height of anything you want within reason. If it's too big, you will probably have problems with the computer complaining that you don't have enough video memory, but certainly something the size of the screen should be manageable. And in order to draw onto the surface, we will say surface set target. What did I call it? Painting surface. And when we are done drawing onto the surface, we can say surface reset target. Okay, so we are now, instead of drawing onto the screen, we are drawing onto the painting surface. If I were to run the game now, you would see nothing is going to happen at all. Like the blue dot isn't even going to be there. And that is because it is being drawn onto the painting surface, instead of the application surface, instead of the screen. If you do want to draw the surface, when you're finished with all that, you can say surface, draw surface, which was the function a minute ago that I tried to make a variable name and GameMaker said no. And you can say the ID of the surface, which is that, and the position, which I'll just make x, comma, y for the time being. And now you can see, once again, we are drawing onto a secondary surface instead of the screen, and then drawing that surface onto the screen. And you can see we are now like spraying the screen with a paint gun or something like that. It's a work in progress. There's no connectivity between dots because the game is currently set to run at a finite 60 frames per second. And when you move the mouse cursor, that does leave gaps between positions of the mouse cursor every frame. Okay. There are ways you can address that. If you want it to look good, you can also, in addition to just drawing a dot at the cursor's position, you can, for example, draw a line between the mouse's previous position and the mouse's current position. There is no built-in way to track the mouse's MOUSE. There is no built-in way to track the mouse's change in position, but you can do that yourself, of course. Mouse X previous. I guess I'll go with window mouse get X and Y for the sake of consistency. And then when we're done with those, at the bottom we can update those mouse previous positions. And lastly, draw a line with a certain width between mouse. Between the mouse's previous and current positions, and let's give it a width of, I believe, 8. Since 8 is the radius of the circle, it would make sense for 8 to be the width of the line. Although I believe that would have to be 16 because draw line width is the parameter is the exact width of the line instead of the half width as the radius would be. And now you can see there's connectivity between lines. That's cool. That's what you would probably want to do if you were to allow the user to draw something on the screen. I don't want this to turn into a video on how to implement MS Paint, but in case you're wondering, there you go. So there are a few things you can do with surfaces, and a few things that you should be aware that surfaces will do whether or not you want them to. So, I've mentioned this earlier, surfaces are stored in video memory, and your computer will handle video memory slightly differently from the regular random access memory that most things in a game are stored in. The player's position, the number of ammunition the player has, the amount of health the player has, that's all stored in random access memory. Video memory is a special type of RAM that the graphics processing unit has, and it's dedicated to things such as texture information. And in GameMaker's case, surfaces are stored in video memory, and they are not at all stored in random access memory. And one of the quirks that video memory has is that it can evaporate at certain points if you do certain things, such as minimize the game. And you may find, if you try to minimize the game while you're drawing a surface, that you get an error such as this, where the surface simply evaporates because the operating system will clear the video memory that the game was using in favor of, so that it can be used by the other programs running on the operating system. And there are some other events that can cause this to happen. So now the surface is just gone, it doesn't exist anymore, and the value that was stored in painting surface, the variable, is no longer there. And when you try to set that as the target surface, the game will be like, that doesn't point to a surface, there's no surface there, and it'll crash with an error message. So whenever you try to use a surface, you should always first use surface exists. and you should check to see if the surface exists first. This isn't something you generally have to do when you're writing code. If you were to use something like a data structure, in this case, the list that you're trying to add data to will not simply evaporate unless you have programmed something wrong elsewhere in your game. And you should not have to check if the DS list exists before adding to it. Same with other things like instances or vertex buffers or that sort of thing. But surfaces can evaporate into thin air depending on what the operating system says and does. So you should always check to see if the surface exists first. Else, you can always say if the surface does not exist, the opposite condition. Let me unindent that and get rid of that invisible tab. You can recreate it. Oops. You can recreate it with surface create and pass it the same arguments as before.
Hey.
And now when you run the game, you will see that it works, that the lines are being drawn. When you minimize the game, and when you don't miss the minimize button like I just did, when you bring it back, the surface will be recreated, and we will be starting over, and the screen will be cleared. That is a common error to run into, having surfaces evaporate when you are trying to use them because you don't check to see if it exists first. If you want this line of code to be slightly more concise, this is just a bit of a helper function that you can use, that you can write to cut down slightly on the amount of typing you have to do. You can just make a script, call it something like surface create. Let's call it surface create safe or something. And you can say surface create safe and go away, helpful text. You can make this a bit of a helper function. The idea being that it will essentially check to see if the surface exists first. If it does exist, just return the surface. If it does not exist, create a new one. Again, if the surface exists, return the surface. Otherwise, return a new surface. And you can call it like this in a single line without having to deal with a slightly longer if statement. Again, you don't have to do this. This is just something that you can do if you want to save a little bit of work for yourself. Again, if I run the game now, it will do exactly as it did before. So the surface exists, and we will be preserving it. Otherwise, when you minimize the game, when the video memory is freed, you can recreate it. Okay. You can also, and I'm sure some people watching this have already started to wonder, sort of the converse to losing a surface because of something the operating system does. It is very easy to create a memory leak out of surfaces. Large surfaces the size of the screen will take up a lot of memory. And if you create them out of control without erasing the old ones, without removing the old ones, you will have a memory leak. So now you can see we will be creating a new surface in every frame.
Hey.
Even if we don't need to, even if the old surface still exists. So if I run this in debug mode so that you can see the memory usage, one, we won't be able to draw anymore because we will be drawing onto a new surface every single frame. And two, if you look at the debugger, the memory graph over here on the side, let me make this bigger. You can see the green line, the memory that is in use, is going up and up and up and up and up out of control. And if you let that go for long enough, you will have the game crash eventually. Itself is actually starting to slow down, and the amount of memory in use continues to go up. And my computer just froze. I hope that doesn't have any implications on the recording, and I think I'm going to run out of video memory soon. I have no idea why I thought it was a good idea to run that code because my computer almost crashed because of the runaway memory leak in there. Okay. That is a good way to make bad things happen. Although with that said, if you do want to delete a surface on purpose, surface free is how you would do that. You can imagine how this works. You pass it a reference to a surface, and the surface will be deleted, and if you try to use it in the future, it will not work, it will break. So deleting the surface before using it, and we have trying to set a surface target that does not exist. Okay. So there are more advanced things you can do with surfaces. You can convert them to sprites, you can convert them to buffers that are just full of pixel data. You can convert buffers of pixel data to surfaces, which lets you do some interesting things. You can use them as textures. I will be talking about those in the future, and some of the things that you can use for that in the future. There's also the matter of the application surface, which, as I said, is kind of special. By messing with the application surface, you can mess with the screen as a whole. You can apply shaders to it. You can do things like room transition effects. But that may be a subject for another video. Okay. That has been a primer on surfaces. Hopefully that video is a little more comprehensive than the one I did like 5 years ago or whatever. I will be talking about other things you can do with them in the future, particularly when it comes to 3D. My name is Michael. I like wizards and dragons and making games. I hope you found that useful and or interesting. I make a couple game dev videos a week, usually relating to 3D, sometimes relating to other things. Code for this entire thing is going to be in the video description. And once again, I should probably add comments to some of these sections of code. Explain what they do. I have a Patreon, so if you want to contribute towards these videos being made, there's links to that. I hope you found that useful, and I will see you all later. Special thanks to Edward Holt, Indie Punch, Posho Dev, and Zenith for supporting these videos. If you want your name in the credits and to force me to say them out loud at the end, head over to the Patreon page in the video description and join the fun.